Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast. My name is Stuart Teicher. I think today's story is one of the creepier stories that I've researched. You'll have to tell me if you agree, but I think you're going to feel the same way. Two quick disclaimers. First, the information I used to write this story was taken from a motion that the state bar made for interim suspension of the lawyer that was involved. So I'm taking what they said as true. And since the lawyer involved didn't fight the suspension, I'm assuming that he found the state's position to be true as well. The other thing is that the name of the woman involved in this story wasn't identified in any of the court documents. They called her Jane Doe to protect her identity, so I made up a name for her. And by the way, the stuff that the lawyer says to his clients in this case, that language came right from the court documents. I didn't make it up. You'll see why I say that when you hear it in the story. And quickly, before the story, my obligatory plug for my day job. I teach ethics CLE for a living, continuing legal education. I call myself the CLE performer because I know we need to get critical content. I just think it would be a nice idea if we could stay awake in the process. If you're a lawyer, tell your friends about me. I give plenary talks for association meetings. I teach CLE programs at bar associations, inside law firms, inside corporate law departments, and I do a lot of law firm marketing events too. Just go to stuartteicher.com or goodlawyersgonebad.com and you can get a list of my programs. Remember to like and subscribe to the podcast. It really does make a difference. And enjoy this sort of creepy story. The day my mother-in-law met me was the day she started to hate me. I don't think she's going to deny it. And I have to tell you, in retrospect, I don't think she was so wrong. When I met my wife, I was a cocky high school kid with a stupid haircut. Oh, God, it was dumb. It was a dumb haircut, and yet it was beautiful. It was a gorgeous 1980s mullet, but not your stereotypical business up front and party in the back type of mullet. No, where I lived in central New Jersey and in the 80s, that was the time of big hair. Whether it was a kid-in-play cylinder of hair reaching into the sky or a teased, hair-sprayed heavy metal head, the hair was big. And my mullet was big and poofy and glorious. And, in retrospect, ridiculous. So when I started to date my now wife, my mother-in-law hated me and my stupid hair. But she didn't complain much because she really didn't think that she'd have to deal with me for too long. My mother-in-law was convinced that my wife and I had a meaningless high school romance and that it would end when we went to college. I knew that she thought it would end. It did not end. And if I'm honest, to this day, I don't know if I stayed with my wife because I loved her or because I just wanted to prove my mother-in-law wrong. It didn't always stay that way. My mother-in-law might not have liked the cocky 16-year-old she met in the beginning, but the truth is we grew on each other and we've had a wonderful relationship. We really do have a great relationship, except for those times where she is stubborn. My mother-in-law's hip was bothering her a little while ago, and she refused to do anything about it. It was clear that she needed a new one, but she just wasn't having it. She wouldn't even go to the doctor. Because of her stubbornness, the pain grew so intense that she literally became immobile. It eventually got too much for her, and she broke down, went to the doctor, and the doctor convinced her that she needed a new hip. Because she did. She got the surgery, it went swimmingly, and she's back to her old self again. Now she looks back and she can't believe that she waited so long. What was so frustrating was that the solution was right there. All she had to do was take it. I mean, it's not like she was born in the 1700s when that sort of thing wasn't available. If you lived in the late 1700s and you needed a new hip, you were screwed. There was no hip replacement surgery. You had no choice but to live with the pain. It was the same if you had osteoporosis or rheumatoid arthritis. There was nothing anyone could do for you. Imagine the hopelessness that a person would feel if they were in that sort of situation during that time in history. The prospect of living out the rest of your life in intense pain, it would make you desperate for relief. You'd probably seek anything to get a respite from the pain. And if you were suffering with that pain in the late 1700s and you happened to be in France, it would most likely drive you into the arms of Franz Mesmer. Well, I don't know about the arms of Franz Mesmer, but it would certainly drive you into the office of Dr. Franz Mesmer. Dr. Mesmer specialized on people with incurable situations. Earaches, toothaches, all kinds of pain and ailments that just couldn't be controlled and couldn't be completely understood sometimes, like delirium and even paralysis. If it was an ailment that confounded the run-of-the-mill physician, Franz Mesmer tried to address it. People flocked to him for help, and when they arrived at his doorstep, they were probably a little leery. That's because Dr. Franz Mesmer was pushing a weird theory. It was a theory that started with an apple. 90 years before Franz Mesmer was practicing medicine, a guy named Isaac Newton was sitting under an apple tree. He got bopped in the head with a piece of fruit, and he went on to change the world. The man who would later be known as Sir Isaac Newton, well, his theory of gravity was published only 90 years before Franz Mesmer became a doctor. And Newton's relatively new concept fascinated the doctor. It fascinated him so much that it caused him to create a related idea. Newton theorized that there was an invisible force in the ether that pulled objects down to the earth, an invisible force called gravity. Well, Dr. Mesmer believed that another invisible force existed, except this one had to do with people. Mesmer believed that there was an invisible force that coursed through the human body. He believed that disease and pain were the result of obstacles in that force that flowed through the body. Those obstacles can be broken and then restored in a harmonious manner. Basically, you'd be deconstructing, then repairing that invisible force. Mesmer was so sure he could improve human health by affecting that invisible force that he devised various therapeutic treatments to achieve the harmonious flow of that force. Since the force existed within the human body, the human animal, and since it was an offshoot of Newton's idea, he called his idea animal gravitation. Now, if that sounds sort of kooky, you need to remember that the idea of an invisible force called gravity was still new, and yet it had been widely accepted. So why not an invisible force in the body? Why not believe that someone could manipulate it? And listen, if you were a person who was desperate and in pain, you'd be willing to try anything. By the way, you've heard of this theory, you just don't realize it. That's because you probably have heard of the revised version of this theory. Mesmer came to believe that the force in the human body reacted to the gravitational pull of the planets, a force pulling or drawing things together. In 1775, Mesmer realized that the phrase animal gravitation didn't quite fit, so he changed the name of his theory to animal magnetism. The outlandishness of Dr. Mesmer's theory was only outdone by the extravagance of the doctor himself. Dr. Mesmer was a flamboyant man who wore a lavender taffeta robe and gestured wildly while administering his treatments. While doing so, he would hold an iron rod over his head, and he would use that implement to control the invisible force inside his patient's being. His process is remembered for being incredible. People described it as being fascinating. But those words could not accurately describe the spectacle that was Dr. Franz Mesmer's therapy. It defied definition. It was like a new word was needed to capture the essence of this process. So from that day forward, the trance-like effect he had on his patients would forever be known as mesmerizing. Divorce is big business in the United States. Courts across the country handle about 3.8 million family law cases a year. The family law and divorce legal industry in the United States generates about $13.5 billion in annual revenue. And that's just lawyers. That doesn't include court costs, mediators, custody evaluators, expert witnesses, nothing, just the lawyers. And the unfortunate reality for the litigants is that it's an industry built almost entirely on the worst day of people's lives. That might not be true for every person in family law, but it's certainly true for the segment of cases that might be among the most heart-wrenching of them all: contested child custody matters. When two people agree on how to split custody of their kids, things can go smoothly. But when parents are antagonistic, it gets messy. The parents get upset, the children can sense the tension, so they get upset, and the court has to make difficult decisions that often infuriate one or both of the parents. The only person who usually walks out happy is the lawyer. Now, some lawyers handle these sorts of cases better than others. Lawyer Michael Fine believed he handled them pretty nicely. Michael Fine understood that this particular type of legal matter could be torture for the parents, and he understood that his clients were in a vulnerable situation as a result. At some point in his career, Fine realized that in family court matters, lawyers often act as part legal counselor and part therapist. So when a client named Carla Davila walked into Michael Fine's office in 2013, he was ready to be a calming voice for a woman who was involved in a turbulent case. Carla Davila was in a battle with her soon-to-be ex-husband over custody of their son. She hired Michael Fine, and she must have thought that it was one of the best decisions she made. Fine appears to have made Carla feel quite comfortable. He even recommended relaxation techniques for her to use to deal with the stress of the case. He assisted Carla in learning how to breathe deep to calm her nerves. Fine would engage in mindfulness sessions with Carla where he assisted her in meditating. Several months after she retained Michael Fine, the lawyer had successfully finalized Carla's custody case. Now, you'd think that would be a cause for celebration. The case is over, you can finally put things behind you, and you can move on. But the unfortunate reality of custody cases is that even though they end, they often never really end. So long as that child has not yet reached 18 years of age, there continues to be something for the parents to fight about. And parents who separated acrimoniously often find things to continue fighting about. That was true in Carla Davila's case, too. In her matter, the contentious issue was visitation. And since she and her ex-husband continued to argue about visitation issues, Carla was still attached to her lawyer. Over the next year, Carla continued to consult Michael Fine for advice and counseling, and the amount of counseling that was needed was incredible. For a year, the lawyer and the client met at least once a week. After a while, the weekly meeting with her lawyers took a toll on Carla. It seemed that every time she left her lawyer's office, she just seemed a little more off. She probably chalked it up to nerves. The tension of the case was taking a toll. Every time she left a meeting with her lawyer, she seemed to feel a little bit worse about everything. One particular day when Carla left Michael Fine's office, she noticed that she had an uncomfortable feeling about things. She just felt awkward. She felt emotionally empty and physically disheveled. Carla got into the driver's seat of her car and just sat there thinking. She tried to think about her case, where it was all going. She didn't know. She just didn't know. Now, when I say that she didn't know, I don't mean that she was confused about case strategy. I don't mean that she didn't know what the next step should be. I mean, she didn't know anything about her case. She and her lawyer always discussed the matter, and Michael Fine opened every meeting with a discussion about the custody matter and visitation issues. But Carla just couldn't remember any of the advice that he gave her. Her memory was foggy. Physically, she felt strange. The stress must have caused a tension headache. She probably sat in her car, rubbing her temples with her forefingers, thinking to herself, "Is this what the beginning of a nervous breakdown feels like?" Dr. Franz Mesmer prepared himself for administering the treatment to his patients. He began the ritual. Adorned in his lavender taffeta robe, the doctor stood at the center of a dimly lit room that was decorated with mirrors, filled with sounds of eerie music, and awash in the scent of burning incense. Beside him was a vessel that he called a baquet. It was French, B-A-Q-U-E-T, pronounced baquet. The baquet was a 4-foot-long oak tub filled with water, iron fillings, and powdered glass. The tub was sealed and iron rods stuck out of the holes on the lid at various angles. Patients of Dr. Mesmer sat in chairs arranged in a circle around the tub. Some had pain in their bodies. Others were struggling with mental anguish. Each of them were connected to the tub by a cord, and they all held the hands of the person next to them, forming a human chain. And then, when directed to do so by Dr. Mesmer, each patient pressed one of the iron rods sticking out of the tub into the part of their body that was in pain. The doctor's theory was that the tub concentrated the animal magnetic force. The iron rods conducted that force into the patient's body, and the chain of hands allowed it to circulate from person to person. Mesmer would then move through the room in his robe, touching patients with a wand or pressing his fingers against the afflicted area on their body. He was directing the invisible force. He was assisting that force to break through the obstacles within the patient's body. And some patients felt it working. Some felt tingling, others felt heat or even pressure. Some felt nothing. The luckiest of the group had what Mesmer called a crisis. They wept, convulsed, laughed uncontrollably, or collapsed, at which point they were carried to a padded room to recover. And it was the patients who had those crises who were typically the ones who got better. People were flocking to Dr. Mesmer for these treatments. The man was a rock star. People came from near and far to get his therapy, and it wasn't just the regular population seeking his help. His patient base included celebrities, the rich and famous, and even royalty. Marie Antoinette was one of his patients. People could not get enough. At one point, he was seeing as many as 200 patients a day. I think it was Andy Warhol who was famous for theorizing that everyone has 15 minutes of fame. Dr. Franz Mesmer had 6 years. That's how long it took for people to realize that the man was a quack. When the doctor's pain-relieving results turned out to be, shall we say, negligible, a commission was convened to review his techniques. The commission determined that there was no invisible force, there was no magnetism, and that any gains that were felt by people were simply a product of their own imaginations. What initially sounded like a paradigm-shifting treatment soon became seen as foolishness. Mesmer was widely discredited, his reputation was ruined, and he left Paris to spend the rest of his life in seclusion. When Mesmer was rejected, his ideas seemed to have been relegated to the scrap heap of medical history. But only temporarily. About 100 years later, an obscure French physician revisited Dr. Mesmer's techniques. He refined them somewhat, and he presented them to the medical world. Those updated techniques even caught the eye of an Austrian physician studying neurotic disorders named Sigmund Freud. By the time Dr. Freud and the rest of the medical establishment heard about this latest incarnation of Dr. Mesmer's treatments, the therapies had been both revised and renamed. Drawing inspiration from the Greek god of sleep, the technique became known as hypnosis. People don't often recognize the signs of an oncoming emotional episode. That was not the case with Carla Davila. She knew something was off. Her most recent meeting with her lawyer took place at the Lorain County Justice Center. The pair must have been there for some hearing or status conference or something. Apparently, after whatever business they were there for was complete, Carla and Michael Fine met in a conference room to debrief. The meeting was taxing as usual. And again, when it was over, Carla just couldn't remember much of what was said. She didn't understand why she had such a tough time keeping her mind on things. After her meeting with her lawyer in the conference room, Carla wandered through the courthouse hallway searching for the exit. People walked by in a blur. She looked at her watch. It was hours after she arrived, yet it felt like she just got there. She felt as if she'd lost time somehow. As Carla ambled down the hallway, she didn't only feel strange emotionally. She felt something strange physically. In between her legs. Carla reached down below her waist and touched her clothing. She felt something odd. She slipped into a small alcove alongside the hallway and faced the wall out of sight of others. She delicately placed her hand inside the front of her skirt and felt herself down by her crotch. She noticed that her panties were wet, very wet. wasn't blood. It was just wet. Carla tried to compose herself and continued to walk out of the building, and as she did, she noticed that her bra wasn't on quite right. She shifted herself and moved her clothing around, putting it back in place. It was at that moment that Carla started to think that maybe she wasn't suffering emotional problems. Maybe someone else was creating these strange feelings in her head. Carla didn't know what to do, so she went to the only place she thought that could help, the police. Carla had a conversation with a patrolman who probably didn't quite know what to do himself. Carla must have explained that she thought that something was going on and that something strange was happening at those lawyer meetings, but she probably couldn't precisely articulate who was doing what to her. It seems that the officer told Carla that he'd escalate the matter within the department, and he gave her one bit of advice. Don't go back to that lawyer's office. Carla's suspicion about her lawyer was growing. And the fact that she went to the police and actually took some sort of step, that might have emboldened her a little bit. Taking a step to help oneself, whatever it is, often makes people feel somewhat powerful. Maybe that's why Carla decided to take matters into her own hands. Carla would be able to heed the officer's advice about not going back to Michael Fine's office because her next meeting with the lawyer was to take place over the phone. This time, however, Carla decided to record the call. Unfortunately, her clandestine effort would not yield any results. Carla did, in fact, record the call, but when she replayed it later, there was nothing unusual that occurred. By this time, Carla was probably more than just a little frustrated, a little angry, and a little eager to get to the bottom of what was going on. The next meeting with Michael Fine was scheduled to take place at his office. Carla probably thought about the advice that patrolman had given her about not going back to the lawyer's office. When Carla thought about that advice, she surely realized that it was good advice, and then she decided to ignore it. Carla went to her next scheduled meeting with Michael Fine, and she would record this one too. Carla had a video recording device in her bag. When she walked into Fine's office, the lawyer took a seat behind his desk. Carla sat in one of the chairs facing his desk. She placed her bag with the recording device on the seat next to her. The meeting began, as they all did, with a discussion about her case. And then, like all the other ones, the meeting was over. Just like in the past, Carla was finished meeting with her lawyer after what seemed like a quick discussion, and she found herself walking back to her car, disheveled. When Carla got home, she watched the recording. She learned that it was not a short meeting. Yes, the meeting began with the lawyer and the client discussing the case, but soon the lawyer started to drop in some strange language about mindfulness. The lawyer's words were soothing. They were about rest and relaxation. The kind of language you'd hear in a meditation app or in a yoga class. A slow voice with soothing instructions. When Michael Fine said those things to Carla at their meeting, her heart rate decreased. Just breathe, he said. Carla's head began to feel heavy. The lawyer then picked up his hand and told Carla to watch his finger. Her eyes locked on the lawyer's outstretched hand and followed his finger as he moved it from left to right. Then his voice switched from suggestive to authoritative. Let your mind settle, he directed. He gave her further instructions, and Carla listened. Her consciousness slowly slipped away. Michael Fine watched his client go deeper and deeper into a mental tunnel, and then, at the precise moment, he counted 1, 2, 3. And on the final word, he snapped his fingers and simultaneously said, "Sleep." Hypnosis isn't magic. It's not mind control. It's not Dr. Franz Mesmer's animal magnetism. Modern hypnosis is basically a trick of attention. When someone guides you with slow, steady language, your mind can slip into a narrowed, almost tunnel vision state. You're awake, but the critical part of your brain just goes a little quiet. You stop analyzing and you start following. But the circumstances have to be right for it to work. What you need is to be in a situation where you feel comfortable letting go. You need to trust the person guiding you. Then your guard is down and your attention is narrowed. The circumstances would be perfect if, say, you met with someone you trust consistently, possibly over an entire year. Maybe even you walk into that person's office vulnerable, in pain, searching desperately for relief. Maybe that person over the last year at your weekly meetings helped you relax, helped you meditate. It seemed that for over a year, lawyer Michael Fine had been implanting little verbal shortcuts into the recesses of Carla Davila's mind. He'd been inserting code words that, when casually placed into conversation later, would allow the lawyer to drop Carla back into a trance-like state. And it could be done pretty much any time he wanted. Carla continued to watch the recording of her meeting with lawyer Michael Fine. There wasn't much to watch initially because the camera was at a funny angle. When Carla put the bag on the chair next to her, she couldn't really aim the camera to get it into great position for obvious reasons, so the camera was sort of pointing to the side. It was pointing toward Carla and slightly upward. You could see the arm of the chair that the camera bag was placed on, and you can see part of Carla's body, her leg, her side, and her hips and her arms, but her neck and face were out of frame. Then all you could see was the distance. You could see the lawyer's diplomas on a far wall of his office. Carla watched herself in the recording. It must have felt like an out-of-body experience. She heard her lawyer telling her to sleep. And when he snapped his fingers, she watched her place her hands in her lap, gently but automatically. She then watched Michael Fine walk around his desk and pull up a chair next to Carla. Because of the angle of her bag, the camera wasn't able to capture Carla's face, but the angle was perfect to capture lawyer Michael Fine's face. He sat down, centered in the frame. Carla was already in a trance, but her lawyer was about to take her deeper. Carla's hands were folded neatly in her lap. Michael Fine sat in the chair next to her quite close, and he almost whispered his directions. When I say 3, every part of you goes limp. 1, 2, 3, go limp. On cue, Carla's hands fell to her sides. Her head dropped down and her chin pushed into her chest. She was out. Michael Fine then stood up and told Carla to move over to the couch in his office. The recording shows Carla snap out of her relaxed position when commanded to move. She walks over and sits on the couch. It might have been an incredible stroke of luck, but that couch was located right on the wall where the attorney's diplomas were hanging. The awkwardly placed video camera had a perfectly clear shot of what happened next. Carla was sitting straight up on the couch. Using those special code words, Fine placed Carla back into a limp state, her head hanging low again, arms down by her side. Fine sat down next to her on the couch and calmly asked her, "Are you excited? Are you aroused? Did you have sex this morning? Did you masturbate this morning?" Fine then launched into an even more sexually explicit conversation. He said, "I'm going to give you pleasure. I will give you the most pleasure you've ever had in your life. You will feel a wave of arousal. You'll build towards massive orgasm. Right now, your juices are flowing. You're soaking wet." While Carla was under hypnosis, her lawyer Michael Fine then induced her to have multiple orgasms right there in front of him. Once Fine decided that he had satisfied his desires, when he felt that he was done watching Carla get aroused, he brought her out of the trance. But before uttering the code word that would restore her to the conscious world, he said, "When you wake up, you'll only recall that we were talking about your case. Do you understand?" Carla confirmed. The next thing Carla knew, she was leaving the office. Carla took the recording to the police. The local police department immediately referred the matter to the Lorain County Prosecutor's Office, and investigators at the county level got on the case immediately. During the time when the prosecutors and the police were getting things into motion, Carla had another weekly meeting scheduled with her lawyer. This time it was a phone call. Carla wanted to make that call and record it as well. But why? She knew what the doctor had done to her at the last meeting. Why would she want to subject herself to his powers again, especially now that the police are onto it? I don't know for sure, but I have a guess. I think she might wanted to have heard it for herself. She now knew what the lawyer was up to, so maybe now that she knew what was happening, she wanted to stay conscious and hear the doctor try his methods. The phone call started like all the others. But then Carla learned just how deeply embedded Michael Fine had implanted himself inside Carla's head. Because even though she knew what was about to happen to her, Fine was still able to get her into a trance, even over the phone. And once he did, he launched into his sexually laced diatribe once again. He said to her, "I am your teacher, your instructor. You and I have a special bond. We have a connection." The lawyer told her that he is the world's greatest lover and that she needs to see him all the time in private. He said, "You once told me that you had a vibrator. The next time you come to see me, I want you to hide the vibrator in your purse. It's a secret and no one is going to know. I want you to bring your horniness, your arousal, and your excitement. It's going to be a life-changing experience." Michael Fine said to Carla, "I'm the only one who knows how to trigger this feeling in you, aren't I?" Carla confirmed it. He said, "I can do this with you all the time, can't I?" Carla confirmed it. Carla gave both recordings to the investigators, who took them before a judge and got a search warrant. But they weren't going to use that warrant to search the lawyer's office. They were going to use it to set up a sting. Carla set up her next weekly meeting with attorney Michael Fine as usual. This time it would be in his office. Before the meeting, investigators fitted Carla with an audio and video recording device. But Carla would not be completely alone. Sort of. Investigators were monitoring the conversation, listening in real time from a nearby location. At this point, Carla must have been a basket case. Not only was she aware of what Fine had been doing to her for so long, but given the last phone call, she also knew that she was powerless to resist it. Now she needed to voluntarily put herself in harm's way with this man one more time. The meeting began the way they normally did, with conversations about Carla's case. But soon after the meeting begins, Fine launches into his usual bag of tricks and gets Carla into a trance. Once again, her body goes limp. Once again, he moves her to the couch. The camera Carla brought in caught their interaction perfectly. Fine sat on the couch, facing Carla, who had now returned to a trance-like state. The lawyer explained to her, "Your entire body is a vessel of pleasure." Michael Fine then takes Carla's hand and begins to rub it. He then starts to massage Carla's shoulders, all while she remains under the lawyer's spell. You can see Fine sitting right next to Carla, almost on top of her, whispering his commands in a soft, soothing voice. He then explains the sexual acts that he will do for her. Fine was certainly becoming aroused himself as he delved further and further into the mind of his powerless client. And then the lawyer must have heard something unusual outside of his office door, because his demeanor changed almost immediately. He jumped off the couch and moved out of frame, hastily heading back to his desk. He abruptly said to Carla, "Okay, we have some papers to go over," and Carla snapped out of her trance. Then you hear the office door open, 2 men walk into the video frame and announce that they're police officers. attorney Michael Fine, was then put under arrest. Videos from the courthouse show Michael Fine handcuffed in front of a judge being informed of his rights. He's wearing a gray suit and a lavender shirt and tie. I think Dr. Franz Mesmer would have at least approved of the color. The video of the meeting from the police sting was presented to the Lorain County Bar Association Ethics and Grievance Committee. 2 days after seeing it, they opened an investigation and immediately scheduled an emergency meeting where they requested an interim suspension of the lawyer's license. It had to be an interim suspension because they had to have a full hearing before they did a final suspension. But because they saw him as a danger to the community, they wanted temporary relief immediately. Now, something I find incredible. The Bar Association had to file a brief with the court where they had to show that the lawyer justifies that interim suspension. So what they need to do is find other past cases that show that relief was warranted in similar matters. What's amazing is that there were a host of cases for them to use. There are apparently a bunch of cases where professionals use hypnosis to take advantage of their patients and clients. Call me naive, but I had no idea that was a thing. Michael Fine's law license was indeed temporarily suspended, and then he permanently surrendered his license a few months later. When Carla's case hit the news, other women stepped forward and said that they had also been taken advantage of by Michael Fine. 6 women eventually made allegations. Fine was charged with 29 felonies. He pled guilty to 5 counts of kidnapping and 1 count of attempted kidnapping, all with a sexual motivation specification. He's currently serving 12 years in prison. Oh, and there's one mildly humorous part of the case that we can end on. In true lawyer slimeball fashion, it was later revealed that lawyer Michael Fine billed the women for the time when they were being hypnotized. Thank you for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the story. I'll speak with you soon. And Haley, drive carefully. And since my son Ross is apparently now listening to my podcast on his way to work, you drive carefully too.